Hello, friends. It is week 3. We are in lecture 1. Can you believe we're already 3 weeks in? I hope that you guys have been learning a lot. I hope that this past weekend, you were able to dive in, maybe digest some of the code that we built on Thursday. We're going to go over a quick recap of that. Today's a fairly light day, and actually you'll see, if you look into our calendar, that this is actually a fairly light week. We're in week 3 right here. You only have one core assignment, and that's the to-do list. I know a lot of you guys have already been working on that, so great job, great work at that. Today's fairly light. We're going to start talking about APIs and understanding what is JSON, JavaScript object notation, calling an API. What does that mean whenever we are chaining methods together? How do we do that? On Thursday, we're going to introduce useEffect and a new tool called Axios, which is what we're going to do to we're going to start by calling APIs, and then we're going to use Axios to do a lot of stuff for us once we talk about promises. And then next week, we will sort of really dive into it. We're going to talk about React Router. You'll have more API practice where we use the Pokemon API that you're going to call, get a response back, and we're going to be able to basically take that response and then do some stuff with it, show it. And we're going to talk about routing, and then we're getting pretty quick. We're going to get into MongoDB, which is our database that we're going to be using. And once we've done that, once we get to MongoDB, we will have learned everything we're going to need to know to build a full stack application. So we're going to have from our React to our Node backend, we're going to have built everything there, being able to connect it using Express, and then we'll actually be able to write and read using a tool. We're going to kind of install this tool called Postman that we're going to be able to write and read in MongoDB just to test it. And then we'll actually create the connections within MongoDB. So that way we know this is exactly how this is working, actually writing to the database. And we're going to start. We'll have our full stack. We're going to build a full stack application together. We're going to start by building the back end. We're going to build the front end, and then we're going to have a lecture exam prep, because in just 3 quick weeks, we're going to be able to start our exams in our exam period. So that is sort of what's on the docket, but you don't have to worry. That's still 3 weeks from now, technically 4, I assume, because because we are still just within week 3. So this is what we're doing today. We're going to talk about iterating with a map. We're going to be talking about lifting state. Those are really the big 2 things that we're going to do today. Well, I'm going to go over map filter for each. There's a great article right here, and we're going to talk about lifting state. That's really all we're doing today. It is a little bit lighter day because we're going to also recap sort of what we did these past couple of weeks, and we're going to make and improve upon our movie React application. As always, we've got some discussion questions that are due Sunday, February 26th. So make sure you do those. There are only one core, I said assignments, plural, my bad. There's one core assignment. It's just our to-do list. So make sure you get that done. And then today or last night, I think is when I got it, you should have gotten an official check-in email. What this email is going to tell you is that either you are sort of in like an academic improvement plan. What that means is that you are below 90% for your core assignments. You either are, or you're on probation, which means you're below 60%. Or you are above 90% saying, hey, great job, you're crushing it. So if these happen every other week, so next week, there will not be an official check-in, but we will check your assignment, see where you're at. If there's any questions, or if you think it's false, like, oh no, I've submitted X amount of assignments and you're not reading those in correctly, please feel free to reach out to me. Want to make sure that you guys are taken care of. Just want to, as a quick reminder, if you do go on probation, you get 3 probations during the entire course of Coding Dojo. So not just the stack, the entire course of Coding Dojo. So if you get to that 3rd, or if you've just gotten your 2nd probation, just want to so you don't get caught off guard. What happens is, and this is sort of automatically moved in, if you hit a point where you're below its official check-in, and then you go on to probation again, you will, if you reach your 3rd, then you're up for academic dismissal. And really what that means is, based in our contracts, or sort of as you guys sign the student package, is that you get up to 3, and then you can be up for academic dismissal. That doesn't mean that you are automatically dismissed, but I would just encourage you, if you did get your first or your second probation, just remember you still have another stack after this. So I would hate for you to be in a position that really kind of puts you in a very stressful state. Because I don't want that for you, because I know that that would be very stressful if that was me. So want to do that there. Are there any questions on sort of this official check-in, anything there? Any questions at all? Cool. If you guys were above 90%, or if you were, at 75%, no worries. Just keep on crushing it. You only have one, so this should be an easy week. It's probably the easiest week for you to catch up on, because again, you only have one core assignment. Cool. So I wanted to start today by just doing a little bit of a recap from Thursday, because we took a pretty big leap on Thursday and we went through a lot of stuff, and I still have this code here. As always, all this code is available to you on GitHub already. So if you wanted to know what we're going to do today, or if you get behind, this is what we're doing. I know normally sometimes I show you guys that, that like, hey, here's what we're building today. We're not really building anything new. We're just gonna break this out from a component standpoint. And so we're not, if I were to show you this is what we're building today, it's gonna look the exact same. So I just didn't do that. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our current code that we have here, and we're going to build it out into something different, something new. Cool. So just to get a sort of setup of what we were doing or what we did on Thursday, I want to walk through everything that we sort of did just from a very, very low level for the next maybe 5-10 minutes. If there's any questions, anything I can clarify, today is the day. It's the lightest day we're going to have this week. So today's the day. If you want me to walk through anything, today is going to be the day. Cool. So here in looking at this code, also feel free to come off of mute or put something in the chat and I can stop. I'm reading that. And I can walk through sort of everything that we need. And if I need to explain any line of code, then I totally can. Cool. So we had talked about use state last week, where it is a way that we can update state. State is a hook, right? That we can hold some information. And we basically had it built out like this, where we had it, there's two things. Can anybody remember what this is called? These are two different guys. What is the first one called? Or what are they both called? Anybody remember? Yeah, Kat, it's a getter, right? So this first one is our getter, and our second one is a setter. Yeah, thanks, Chris. It's a setter, right? Remember, setter is what? Does anybody remember what setter is? Like what kind of data type, or what, not necessarily data type, but like what is setter? Is it a variable? Yeah, Kat, it's a function, right? This setter is actually a function. What it does is it, as you guessed it, sets this value right here. This first one allows us to get the information that's currently attached to this. This one allows us to set the information for here that we're going to get. So the names are very, very clear of what they're doing. So initially, whenever we learned it, we broke it down this way, right? To where everyone was separate. What we also realized is either one of these will work. Either one of these are very okay. But what this does is this just creates an object that we can update. Instead of having to have these separately, we can sort of consolidate these into one object, where we've got this movies and set movies. I guess movie would be a better name here, but alas, here we are. I don't want to break my code on a whole bunch of places. Where we use use state. So we are setting, whenever we use use state, we are saying this is going to initially, like this is our template, is going to be an object. So we're taking all of these and putting them all in one object, where we've got a key of movie title with an empty value, right? Key of genre, release here, ticket sold. We're not setting it to anything. Cool. Any questions on that at the beginning? Put a 1 in the chat if this is making sense, if you still are crushing it, or put a 0 if it's not. Great. I'm gonna skip this guy real fast. Then we have this form And this form, what it allows us to do is keep track of some information. Now we introduced this ternary operator. As you guys know, and as you guys have seen, this is a visualization of what will happen, right? It says, okay, if there is a movie title and it's less than 3, because we didn't want it to show up if it was empty at the beginning, right? Then we wanted to show some information, right? Hey, movie titles required. But we did see that this actually didn't prevent us from actually submitting bad data. It just was more of a visualization. In order for us to be prevented from doing that, we created this method called movie validation, where we had a value that was set to true. This is just a Boolean. We gave it some conditions and said, hey, if any of these, that's why we use the or, if any of these do not work, let's go ahead and set that to false. And then when we submit our file, it was all dependent on if this was true or not, right? If it was false, if our movie validation failed, meaning that they didn't give us good information, then we wanted to make sure we did not set or submit our form, right? So that was what we did. Again, we're going to do some validations a little bit different whenever we get an actual database, but for right now, for what we know, this is what we're able to do. We always do prevent default. Can anybody remember why we do that? Go ahead.
No, sorry, I just saw the chat. They said what I was going to say. It just prevents the browser from refreshing.
Yeah, what happens if the browser refreshes?
The form data gets lost.
Yeah, exactly, right? So if by default, hence prevent default, React will refresh our data, and then we'll actually lose it, right? And so this prevent default allows us to say, no, we don't want you to refresh right now and lose our data. So great job. Thanks for walking through that. We also talked about whenever we wanted to take in this data, or if somebody is typing something, we were saying on change, we want to change the state of whatever they are typing. So here we have movie title. Now this change handler was a little bit more advanced, and I want to make sure that I break this down for you as much as we can. What this is doing is, instead of, initially we had an individual function for each one of these where we did, E, and then we did an arrow function of e.target.value. And so we ran the, set release year to e.target.value, set ticket sold. What we wanted to do is say, hey, we want to have dry code. We don't want to repeat ourselves. So let's just make one handler. And what this one handler will do is target anything that we're changing, but it keeps track of all the other information. So that's exactly what it's doing, right? We have this event, and we have this event object. We know that we've looked at this event object. Then we're running our set movies function. So what this set movies is doing is it is spreading out. Now, this is just creating an object, right? All this is doing is this is creating an object. Let me draw. Yep. So we have this object here. That's what this curly bracket is doing, where we're saying movies. Now, what this is doing is, let's say we're changing the movie title, which we're going to deal with here in a second. This is saying, well, what if all the other things were changed? What if release year was there? What if, genre, and what if ticket sold was already there? Then we are spreading that out. So that way we've got, genre with some, action or whatever. What it does is we're keeping access of all the information and just updating the entire object in itself. Maybe we've got release year. I'm just going to put RY, maybe 1990. And let's say, again, I'm changing my movie title. What this is doing is just saying, okay, give me all the stuff that I currently have, lay out the object of what I currently have. Then I want to add this key. That's what this comma is doing, saying, cool, now let's add of this key, which we saw that our e.target.name was. Anybody remember where e.target.name came from? What exact part of my code gave us this value right here? I'm not going to scroll down. Yeah, the form, but what part in the form specifically, Michael? Yeah, our inputs. Great job, Oscar. So in our inputs right here, where we've got, let me get rid of this. where we've got this name piece. This name of our input allowed us to go and say, okay, I want to add this key of movie list, and these keys, or this portion right here, or wherever our input is, has to be exactly the same as what we set up here. And so that's the one we're targeting. That's the key we're targeting. And this is the value we're changing. So this is spreading out us being able to keep access to all of the other ones, plus only manipulating the key that we are typing into. So in this case, movie title, we're getting everything, genre, all that other stuff. And then we're just changing movie title. Cool. Now that's the entire form. Once we have our form and they press our submit button, we have the submit handler, which again, we prevent default. We run our validation. If that comes back to true, then we decided we wanted a console log so we could see some stuff. We run this set movies. Now this was, we wanted to keep track of all of our movies. Now we're going to use a database for this in the long run. This is just kind of a quick way for us to use this or to keep track of the information. So we created this state right here, which we're going to manipulate today, where we have movies list and set movies list. This is just a array of all of our movie objects, right? And so whenever we added one, as long as it was valid, it passed our validation rules right here, right? If valid, what's is basically saying if this is true, which again, this either returns true or false. If there was no error, it returns true. If there was an error, it returns false. So if it's false, it's not going to go in here. But what we're doing is we're adding it to our movie list. We're spreading out and saying, I want to keep all of the values from that list that's already in there, or array. And then I also want to add in movies. Movies is this object right here. So we're adding our new movie. And then lastly, we saw that if we submit, it kept the data, right? It would keep the same form data. So instead of having to go and delete each one, we then reset our movies. So that way it cleared out our values. And then lastly, what we have to do in order for that to work is we have to set the value to movies.ticket sold. So as we reset these values to nothing, just empty strings, the values became empty strings and became nothing. Okay, that's everything we did in a nutshell. Any questions on this? Any place where you guys got stuck? Oh, last thing we did was then take that list and those movies and we mapped and went through each one of them. That way we could visualize them on our site. And we saw that we could add and add and continue more. So any questions on this so far? How you guys feeling about this? Like scale of 1 to 5, how are we doing? Like this is making tons of sense. This is not making sense. It's a little bit different than the platform does it, but I think it makes a little bit more sense. And it's a little bit more concise. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Gray and I, and we can walk through all of that information. Cool. Matthew asked, are we going to see more mapping today? We're going to talk about mapping, and we're going to talk about higher order functions just very briefly, because we're just going to keep using them. Talk about really the difference between that and for each and filter, what those are going to do for us. And then we're going to talk about lifting state and how that applies. So that's what we'll be doing today. Is we will, we talked about introducing use state. We walked through that, forms of validations, and we reworked them. Event handlers today, we're doing map, filter, for each. Here's a great article for the difference between for each and map. And then we'll talk about lifting state, and that'll be what we do today. Cool. All right. So let's jump into today. Okay. So let's talk about higher order functions. And in these case, we're going to talk about for each, we're going to talk about map, and we're going to talk about filter. Luke, can anybody tell me what a higher order function is? Do you guys know? Anybody have any guesses? There's two types that we kind of talked about on the platform. Any question or any thoughts of what is a higher order function? So yeah, so there's a callback function. Callback function is one of them. And what takes in a callback function? Anybody know? Well, it's actually just a high order function. And that's what it's called. And I know it sounds sort of silly, but what that means is it is basically a function. So I'm going to say a higher order function definition. So it is a function that takes in a function as an argument, or it returns a function. So those are sort of the two options, right? And so that is what a higher order function is a function that takes in a function as a parameter. The function that it takes in, oops, it's supposed to be a higher. The function it takes in is called a callback function. Oops. So it is a function that is passed in as an argument to another function. So from a very base standpoint, a callback function is just a parameter that is being passed through. Cool. So before we sort of jump into that, let's think of our for loops, right? And we've talked about for loops a million times, or not a million times, but we've talked about them quite a bit. And here's a basic for loop where we've got our array. Here we just have 10 assets or 10 items within this. And here's just your basic for loop, right? Where we create our let, we create our I, our index. We say how far is it going to be? Here's our condition, and then our iteration. So if we want to go up or an increment or decrement, or if we wanted to skip, or if we want to do whatever, and we just console log AR or console log the item at this individual index. So if I come here, I just get 1 through 10, right? Very, very basic. Now there's another one that was added in for ES6. And this one's not a higher order function. This is just another one of for loops. And this is called a for of. Very, very sort of new-ish and popular, where in ES6, instead of saying, for loop in deciding, and I've showed you this before, and having to write all this information, what we can actually do is if I have my array here, I can say I can declare let item of array. And what that does is doing the exact same thing as up here. Is it saying, okay, item is my iterator. Item is my iterator. I want to go through iterator to an extent, but I'll show you the difference here in a second. I want to go through just to the end of this array. And then I want to increment by 1. So I want to step through each individual piece. Now, what this is doing is this for let item is not the number of my index, right? So here we're starting at 0 and we have to say array of I. So array at this position, I want the value at this index. If I use a for of, this item is referring to the actual item itself. The actual item itself. So here, when I console log item, I'm just going to get 1, 2, 3 through 10. Yeah, same exact thing. This item is not, again, referring to this index piece, which is what we're doing here. And then we have to say array of this index. Item is just referring to this value right here. There's some pros and cons between each. This, and it's sort of, I was looking up even today, like the speed. Actually, a for loop is faster than a for of, but it is, so, I mean, it's a very minute difference. Somebody asked, can we use any word for the word item? Yeah, so this could be unicorn, and it would do the same exact thing. Item is just a base word that we can do. Yep. So you can change it to whatever word you want to use there. But one of the big things is this is ES6, so it's sort of the newish syntax, but it's also, if we look at it, it's a little bit easier to understand, right? Okay, if I'm doing this, I'm going through unicorn, or I'm associating unicorn to this represents this value, and I'm going all the way through. So it's a little bit easier from a syntax to read. The performance is minute, if anything, in the sort of favorable towards just your traditional for loop, but it is easier to read. Now, some of the limitations with a for of is that you can only iterate through one by one, and you go through the entire array. Right here, you have the power to, if you wanted to do, like if you wanted to swap spots, or if you wanted to reverse a list, you might do like array/2 and then do some sort of different pieces, right? You have a little bit more more flexibility if you wanted to do multiple, if you want to do I+2, if you wanted to, do every fifth one, you could do that. Here you are stuck to iterate through the entire thing. Plus you can only increment by one. So that is an issue there, just as those are differences there. If you are just going to do a for loop, I would say getting used to this. This is a little bit easier, a little bit cleaner, and then it's a little bit more readable. Any questions on these two? Cool. Next is, now we're entering our higher order functions, right? Where our first one is our for each loop. Let me grab my array. Now, for each is a tool. And first off, before we do that, I'm going to hop in here. I want to show you. Oh, sorry. I just got a national emergency. Hold on, give me 1 second. Can you guys hear me? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. I just, my phone, I just got like a national weather something, and then it was like screaming in my ears, like an Amber Alert. Sorry about that. And sometimes it goes between my phone and my computer. Okay. So there's a great article. Let me come here. And these are going to be the differences, some of the main differences. Sorry, that was like overwhelming, like the Amber Alert things, and it's like super loud and like, it was just in my ears. Okay. So there's two sort of breakdowns, and I talk about them, or I show the bigger breakdown. If we go to the GitHub here, if we go week 2 and we go to lecture 3 in class, we go to this main.js, there's also a breakdown here. Here are these higher order functions where we have some examples of higher order functions. Actually, just want to show this for a second. Where here we've got just a function that, here's just a function, just a basic ES5 function called add that takes in 2 parameters, X and Y, right? And then returns X and Y. Here we've got multiply, and then I've got this function called calculator. Now what calculator takes in is X and Y, but it also takes in this idea of operator. Here you can see that it returns operator of X, Y. So I can add in this add or multiply function, and it will do that function right here. So if I say add 2 and 3, this is going to take in 2, 3. This is the add function, and then it will run this function with those parameters in there, and it will return to me 5. This is called a higher order function because we're taking in this function here called operator, which is either going to be add or multiply. You can have, a whole host of these. Oh, let me get this. Sorry, I copied it and I didn't paste it. Oh, maybe I did. You can have, you could have 100 that you call. These guys are called callback functions, right? Because these are being passed in as a parameter to my higher order function here. Same thing with this guy. We've got this function greet. We have this function hello, which takes in name and the greet. So then here we have greet name, which kind of is redundant, right? Like, why would you have greet name and greet and greet? But this guy is a higher order function, this say hello, because it takes in a function as a parameter. This guy is my callback function because that's being passed through there. Cool. So that's that one. And then this guy. Now, with that, we've got really, again, the three higher order functions we want to talk about are for each and map and filter. So for each is a higher order function that we can call. And what it will do is it will apply a function to each item within an array. Now, note, I want to note these are only array functions. They are not like if I try to call a for each or a map on a object, that's not going to work. On an object specifically, if I have a list of objects, that'll be just fine. But if I try to call this on like, some sort of object dot map, that's not going to work. It has to be an array. And we can see that here, right? And I actually added in the under the hood. So this is what's happening. This is what, when you call for each on some array. So here, if I look at this guy, there's a few things happening. Here's my array, const ARR. I can say ARR, so I'm calling my array dot for each. Now, when we do that, it must take in at least one. And remember, it because it's a higher order function and we're using for each, it must take in a callback function. So here we've got two items. This one is item and this one is index. Now, index is optional. Item will represent in the same way, and this is why I wanted to show you the for of. Item represents this value right here, not the index per se. If I wanted the index as well, I can also say IDX or index or unicorn, doesn't matter. And it knows that the second parameter, the way it's built, the second parameter will represent the index if I wanted. So if I wanted to print these guys, I can run and say 1, which is item, index is 0. And we see that throughout this entire thing, right? Now, what for each will do is it will allow for me to run some function on these values within a list or within an array, sorry. And I can do something with it, right? I can, in this case, I'm just console logging, but it can be more in depth. And we'll look at map here in a second. And they operate very similarly for each and map, except there are some differences, right? They are both taking in functions. They're both taking in callback functions. They both apply them to each item within a array. One of the big differences, though, is what for each will do is it will return undefined. It doesn't return anything. Like it just will apply them and do that, but it won't return anything. Whereas map, if I do map, what it does is that applies the same sort of idea. You can just pass in one parameter, or you can pass in a second one, and that can be your index. If you pass in a third one, like ARR or, like old ARR, it'll actually give you a copy of the array as well. It just keeps a copy with it. But what map does is actually creates a copy or a new array and returns that. So if I say const new ARR, I still call ARR. So I'm calling my array dot map. Again, I don't have to give it an index. In this case, I'm just not going to because it wasn't doing anything for me. And what this returns is this new array. So if I set it equal to this new array and I run this, I get an error. ARR, where's my issue?
You just didn't highlight it.
Oh yeah, whoops, sorry. Whenever you run Code Runner, if I just do this, it's just looking at the highlighted piece of code. So if I go like this, now I get 2, 4, 6. So I get the multiplication of 2 for each item within my array. That's what it returns to me. And that's what it goes through it here. Right, here's some definitions, the returning value. Now, if you were to look at like speed, then for each is actually faster than map because map is creating a new array. For each is not. It's just going through each item and then, applying some sort of function to it. But again, that's going to be so minuscule that you're not necessarily going to have to like worry so much about the speed. It depends on what you're trying to do. So another big deal is that map allows you to chain other methods if you wanted. So if I wanted to say like map.reduce, which is another function that you can do, there's quite a few attached to your array class, then I can chain it, right? So I can say, okay, map, do this. And then after that's done, I want you to do this, right? I can do that. With for each, I cannot. You cannot chain. You're not allowed to chain and add in because map gives you and it returns. If you guys remember this from web fundamentals, if you're trying to do chain, you're trying to chain methods, you had to return self, right? You had to return some value in order for it to chain. Map returns a value because for each does not, you cannot chain it with anything because it doesn't know what dot reduce means. It's like, oh, I have no understanding there. Cool.
Just a couple of questions in the chat.
Yeah.
I know Ethan had his hand up, but Estadio asked the question first. He says, so where does the higher order function take in another function as an input?
Yeah.
Or as a variable?
So this guy right here, if you think about it, this is just an ES6. This is an arrow function, right? Map, if I were to just call dot map, because these parentheses, this is the parameter I'm taking in. Right? Anything between these parameters. Here, this is a arrow function. So that is the callback function within itself. So this in itself is a callback function. So when map is calling this is the parameter we're passing through. Well, all the way to this too, right? And so that in itself is our callback function. Now, if I had some function called, multiply by 2, I could have passed that in. They do the same thing, right? They would do the exact same thing there. So that's what's happening there. Good question, though. Any other questions?
Ethan said that you answered his question while I was speaking, so he's good.
Okay, cool. Last one I want to show you, because this is going to come in handy whenever we are dealing with our CRUD applications, is filter. And so what filter will do is it will also, it'll go through our array. Again, you can pass in 3 parameters, but you really just need 1 for right now. And then we'll give it some sort of condition. And so in this case, we're just saying item is greater than 5. And what this will do is it'll return to us an array where this condition is true. So in this case, we want console log new ARR. It returns to us a array where, and it's going to return to us just a array where the items are greater than 5. So if I were to run this, now we just get 6 through 10. So it's a great way to filter when we start dealing with primary keys and unique identifiers. This will be a way that we can iterate through or filter our data or our lists, which I think we're going to do a little bit tomorrow. We're going to talk about delete, where we're going to apply an ID, be able to filter and say, I want to have everything but that ID, right? Or I want to get everything. This would be a great tool like cough, whenever we're having the exam, if you're having to do some sort of date piece, then you can maybe say the 3 most recent, or if you wanted to deal with some sort of manipulation of our data, you can use filter for that, and filter will give us that value. So if you wanted just all of the, ticket sales above 500,000 to be in like the platinum club or whatever we're building, I could use filter, pass in that item, and then check at that. Now, if it was a object, we could do that as well. We could deal with that. And it'll iterate and filter through that as well. Any questions on that? Sorry, my wife just got in. So if you can see that in the background. Any questions? Clear as mud. Can you guys put a 1 through 5 if this is making sense, or 0 through 5? I switched it up on you. I put 5 instead of 1. Cool. Okay. Sneaky, I know, I got you. Okay, cool. I just wanted to talk about that. Today's probably the only day I wanted to, and then instead of doing this in office hour, I think these are important because we're going to use these tools frequently. Now, sure, let's save. Cool. So let's go to our code. And then now for the next 20 minutes, we're going to talk about lifting state. Talk about lifting state. Now, before I do that, I do just want to show that we can do this where we've got now iterating through this. There's two things that we did is we took our array, which is movie list, which is what we created here, right? This was just our list of movies. We were able to utilize map, passed in movie, and then we had to pass in index. And we'll talk about that. Oh, let's talk about that now. When we're using map in React, what it wants to do is it wants to be able to identify an index for each of these iterations. So if I've got multiple, let's say I've got multiple values, right? It's going to want to know if I'm going to update one of them. If I want to only update the, if I'm going to edit this guy, it wants to have a unique identifier for this component, because what we could have done is mapped and then passed in or had some information where we have a bunch of components that we're iterating through or a bunch of values that we're going to add through a component, right? And so what IDX or this index is I want a unique identifier so I know which component and which information I'm actually changing. Now, React would actually say, do not use index. As a last resort, you can use index, but we want to do something more unique. That's where, and we'll use like a tool tomorrow that generates basically like a fake ID. But that's where an ID is really going to come in. Our primary key is what you might have heard it as well. A unique identifier, something that's unique to you. You think of like, in the US, if you're a US citizen, then you have a social security number. There might be a ton of Will Calhouns out there, but there's only one Will Calhoun with my social security number, right? That's really the idea of what we would want, some sort of unique identifier here. For right now, because we're not there, because we haven't built that, we can use IDX. And that's really just the index position of each one of these values here. That's what's happening here. Is it's really wanting something to make sure that it's unique. But we'll keep building on that. Cool. Now, this is great. We've built this tool. This is awesome. But what I really should have called this is maybe form JSX. We want to break these down, right? We want to break these apart because the power of React is we can have multiple components and just plug and play and reuse them where we want, right? We want to be able to reuse them exactly where we want to be able to use them. And so what I could have done and what I should have done is call this form. We're going to keep it as movie because there's too many places for me to change it. But let's actually take and say, okay, this is the only thing I want it to do is handle my form stuff. I don't want it to handle this display. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make a component to make this display. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say display .jsx. Anybody remember what I can put here to make my component quickly? Yeah, RAFCE, find out what it means to me. Oh my gosh, I can't spell. Okay, here I've got my display component. Perfect. And let's actually just take this code. And let's move this. Let's see, this is this guy. My divs line up. Let's just move this code into my display component. Cool. Great. Now, one thing to note though, is movie list. If I were to get this running, it's going to say, I have no idea what movie list means. I have no idea what this is, right? Movie list exists on this movie.jsx. That's where movie list is currently living. Now, the issue is when we're dealing with state is that here we've got, this is kind of the hierarchy of what we currently have based off of what I just built. Is here, I've got my app.js. I've got my movie. .jsx, and then I've got my display .jsx. Can you guys tell me the name of what the relationship between my movie and my display is? Anybody know? Yeah. Great job, Chris or Jonathan. These are siblings, right? And then what is my app.js to these guys? Yeah, it's a parent. Exactly. Now, not trick question, but bigger question. How is data able to, if you guys remember back to last week, how is data able to move in React? Yeah, it moves down, right? Top down. What data cannot do is it cannot move from side to side, meaning that siblings cannot share data. So this is where, if I need to have access to this, this is this idea of lifting state. Really what that means is I'm going to take my state from movie.jsx. So in this case, my movie list. And instead of, because I can't share it with display, what I want to do is actually lift it up to the parent component. So that way now this state can be shared amongst siblings. This is the idea of lifting state. So I'm going to lift the state up to my app.js. And now I can pass it into movie.jsx or display.jsx because I cannot go side to side, right? Data only moves downward, top to bottom, or parent to child would also be another thing. So this is the parent, movie, and display are children of our app.js. Cool. So let's go. And does that make sense sort of from a high level? Do you guys understand that? Cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift my state. I'm going to move it from movies. I'm going to go into my app.js. And then I'm going to create this guy here. Now, I'm already getting some errors. What are the things that I need? I just moved it to here. What do I need to do here? I don't know what that is. I do need to import my component. I do need to add in display. That's true, Jonathan. But just to use this, what am I going to need to do? Yeah, exactly, Alan. I need to import uState from React. So I'm going to say import. I'm going to say uState from React. Right, in order for me to use uState, I need to import it. Cool. You guys are brilliant and you're 100% right to where I need to add in my display. So wherever we want to do this, I'm going to say display. Oops. Display. Perfect. Where I also have to import display if I want to use it. I'm actually just going to move it. If it's highlighted and you do Alt, or I think it's Option, you can move things up and down. So it's just a little key. Actually, I want this higher. Let me get rid of this. Okay. That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what length. It's just me and how I operate. Okay. So I've imported both. I have access. Let's go ahead. I'm going to open up my terminal. So week 3, lecture 1 in class. Oh, CD movie. Perfect. So now I'm going to say npm start. And we're going to get some errors, but we're going to problem solve through these errors and see what we do. Oh, wow. No, we didn't get any errors. Good for us. Yes, we did get some errors. There we go. I was like, what the heck? We're supposed to get errors here. We are not that good yet. Okay. So we got some errors. Now let's look, and can anybody tell me what this is saying? It says source components. For reading this, we're saying, okay, components. Okay, so I know it's within my components folder, and it's on my display JSX. I'm having an issue where it's saying movie list is not defined. Movie list is not defined. So if I go in this, it's saying line 8. Okay, movie list. Great. Okay, that makes sense because movie list is not stated here, right? I don't. This state is not living within my display at the moment. What is a way that I could pass that in, or I could use that? Exactly, Christopher. It's a prop. So what would I do? You guys kind of guide me here. for the next 10 minutes. If I want to be able to have access to movie lists, somebody can come off mute or, anything. What can I do here? What is sort of my next step? Import props. I do want to do that. Let's start here. Let's start here. If I'm dealing with props, let's bring it in as a prop. Yeah, exactly. So here, what I'm going to do is there's two things, right? All I want for this component to do is to be able to read this list and show it. So do I need to give it access to both of these? Does it need to have access to movie list and set movie list?
No, if you're
No,
just
it doesn't.
displaying.
Yeah, just because I'm displaying, right? So I can just say something like this. Movie list equals movie list. Perfect. Now I've passed that into props to my display. Now, what I could do is I could say props and then come down here and then say, const equals blah, blah, blah. I could say this, and this would work just fine. Now, if I save this and we come down here, my React app, now you see that error is gone. Perfect. There's another way to do it. So we could actually, instead of doing it this way, if I'm passing in props, I can actually, because that's destructuring, I can just do this. And this will actually destructure for me. So I don't have to have this line. Both of them will work. Both will be fine.
Are you only
Somebody
doing
asked-
that because there's only one?
You
Like,
can do that with multiple too. So we're
Okay.
gonna do that with set list as well. Yeah, great question, Christopher. We're gonna do it on the other one as well, but we can do both. So let me ask, what is the benefit of passing in just movie list again? Asterio, the idea is we only want to give access, or okay. Could we pass in set movie list to this component? Sure. Right, that's fine. Now we're passing in data that it's never going to use. And so the idea is, well, let's just do for the component what the component needs. It's never going to have to set movie list. So we don't need to give it that information. If it has that information, is it going to break anything? No, it's not, right? It's still going to operate the same way. But now we're just asking our, let's say we had a ton of components. We're just passing in information that we don't really need. It's sort of like if you're going to go hiking. I think I've probably given this analogy before. If we're going to go hiking in Sedona, Arizona in July, I might have one hiking pack that has, that I'm going to take to Mount Everest as well, where I've got this winter coat. Could I take that winter coat with me to Sedona, Arizona in July? Sure. Is it going to hurt anything? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, maybe it's just going to add to my pack. But do I need to take it? No, I don't, right? It's more efficient and quicker if I don't have my ice picks and my winter coat and my winter everything if I'm going to go hike in the desert, right? And so, yeah, by not passing it through, it's less things that our application maintains state of. And then there's also really no point for me to give it there. Again, if you were to pass it through, it's not going to break the code per se, but this is just for displaying. It's not for altering any sort of data. So therefore, we just can keep it this way as well. Now, for the other side, though, my movie is going to be doing some things, right? We are wanting to update some values. We want to set our movie list. We want to have access to our movie list, right? So because we need to know, okay, if I am doing this, I need to bring in my movie list. I need to be able to spread. I need to be able to have access to both. So what I need to do is come here and I need to be able to add both, right? I need to say movie list equals, I'm going to say movie list. And then I'm going to say set movie list is equal to set movie list. Perfect. Now, am I done? Is this good? Should we be good? No, what's happening? What did I forget?
importing the props.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't import them. So again, I could do the same thing where I say props. And then I say const. Const. Movie list, set movie list as props. That will work just fine. Or what we could just do is this. It just says movie list, comma, set. And this will actually destructure them for me. So now when I come here, my code's working. Perfect. I'm looking here and I inspect and look at my components. I can see in my movie, look, I'm having access to my movie list. There's nothing there. Set movie list. This is saying that this is a function, which is what we know, right? Set movie list is a function. But then I also have, and we have these hooks. That is cool. This is currently working. This is great. Now I have this display that is having access to movie list. They're now separated components. But if I say Shrek, comedy, let's say 2001, I have no idea. And then all these tickets, if I say add movie, it still works. Now, obviously it looks different because I had these all in a row and it's sort of the styling that we had, which I think we could probably, let's see, I haven't done this yet, but let's say dot row. Let's see if this works. I don't know if this will work. Well, we'll try it. No. Oh, let's see. Nah, it didn't work, but I just would have to style it in whatever way I styled it. But I now have sort of decoupled my displaying from my actual movie component. So now they are separate and I can alter, and this is the ability to have component architecture to where now I can adding display. Let's say I wanted to say the same idea, but on another aspect of my my website. Now I can just inject this display at that spot versus having to rebuild this code over and over again. Does that make sense? Any questions on this? This is all we have for today. So I'm done sort of teaching. Any questions on this? There's no way I explained it that good. Any questions? I mean, you don't have to have a question. Maybe it is. I mean, it's a little bit simpler of a concept, but just wanting to make sure. Okay. Thank you, Christopher. That was really kind. Let's walk through it one more time. Just real quickly in the next 5 minutes. So we have our app, our movie, and our other component. Let's say I even had a third component, right? I could do, let's say I just had a third one. If I wanted to have data shared between each of these, React does not operate that way. It cannot go side to side and it cannot go from bottom up, right? The only way that React will share data is from the top downward, right? And so if I want to have something, in this case, I wanted multiple components to have access to my list of movies that I'm keeping in state right now. What I can do is what we call lift state. So what that means is I'm going to take this piece of state and I'm going to lift it up to the component. Lift it up to the component that is above all of the components that I need to have access to this information. And so now, because I lifted it up to my app.js, which is our parent, all I have to do is pass that in via props. Here. To each component, and now my component has access to the state. We can run this function if we wanted to update my state, and it will update the state. But if I don't need, like, I don't need this function for display because all this is doing is showing data, then I don't have to pass it through. Christopher, I see that you had a question.
Yeah, so unless you're like really good at planning ahead and you write out your entire project, it seems like it's kind of common to maybe start developing whatever and then realize you need to go back a little bit and give the app.js the ability to pass things down. Like you're constantly gonna be refactoring a certain project.
Yeah, and that could, like, when we start building our, that's true. As you get, there's two things I would say. As you get more practice with it, you'll start thinking through and be like, oh yeah, okay, I'm gonna need access to here, here, here. Now, if you are refactoring, or you're trying to build a new feature that you want to put in production, and maybe it's like, maybe we started here and then we go, I really want to break this down and have like a new display version, then you might constantly just in your own workflow be going and changing state, because maybe a new feature request needs access and you're like, now I got to give it to the parent because they're on the same side. So it's a common thing as we're building out our project, as we're preparing for the exam, we're going to think through, okay, what is going to need access to what? Like, we're going to walk through that a little bit, but yeah, I mean, you're right. It comes with practice, and it comes with constantly sort of being like, I should have done this. Okay, I'm going to move it here. Should have done this. I'm going to move it here. And then you'll get to a point where you're like, let's think through this. What's going to need access now? That way I don't want to have to like.
It'll be
redo-
pretty rinse and repeat too, right? Like
Yeah,
it's more or less just doing this over and over again if you're gonna have to keep like passing off
yeah,
state.
yeah, totally. Alan, you had a question?
Yeah, I was curious if you had to, if app.js has to be the parent in this case, could you have made movie the parent and passed it down, like kept your state where it was at originally
display?
and passed it down to display as a child of movie?
I'm sure you could. Let's do it. Yeah, I think you could, right? If you would have just called instead of coming here. If I would have just called like display. And I passed in some data, for sure. You could have done that, just like that. Let's see. Let's even just test it. I'm not even doing it this way. Because in theory, what we're doing is we're passing now what our structure looks like is we do app, then we're doing movie, and then we're doing display, right? So let's see. Oops. Let me annotate, clear. I think even just in this, it should work. Display is not defined. Oh, I got two. Let's just do this.
Is it because it's in line? You wouldn't
It's,
need
it's,
slash
no, it's just
components, you'd
that,
just
it's
need
just slash display.
display as slash display.
Yeah. Let's see. I think.
I think it's dot slash display. Like dot,
Dot slash display.
I think that.
Oops. Top gun. See. Yep. That also would work.
So then with the way it's currently set up, then you would also have access. So something came up that was in a separate hierarchy, like if you added another component that was a sibling to movie, you would still have access to all the information that was held in display because state is being lifted up to app.js still.
Yes, so if you had a, yes. So right now, the reason this is working is because when we are bringing this in to our movie, this becomes a child, right? So now display is a child of movie. So therefore, yes, we're able to bring that down. Now, if we didn't have that, let's say I wanted to have, you know, let's just say like some component here. That would be a sibling of movie. But is not coming, it's not obviously attached to this, and we're not becoming a child here, then yes, because state is lifted to this guy, we could still pass it in here and utilize it. But because we're calling display within movie, this becomes now a child and it's no longer a sibling. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
And would you still be able to call display on that some component here? Or because you're calling it, I'm assuming you can call it and make it both a sibling and a child in different regards.
She's saying here.
Just by simply.
This guy? You're
Yeah,
saying
I mean,
this?
it'd be redundant here, but
Sure. Let's see. Yes, because the way we've set it up is we can accept this guy. So yeah, it would be able to, yeah, you're just doing the same thing. So here's the second call. And here's the first one. So this is this guy is us calling it here. And then the second one is us calling it here. Yeah. That's just because we've set it up. Because we can pass it all the way down, either through here's a child, because also when we call it that way, and if this is confusing you guys, then please, please, please don't let this confuse it. Because we're calling it this way, this becomes, when it's this version, it becomes a sibling to movie. But when it's embedded in movie, it becomes a child. But because state is lifted to app, all three are available. Does that make sense, or does that confuse more than what it was? If that's confusing,
no, that makes sense to me, but I apologize if I caused confusion.
no, you're good. Yeah, this would be a redundant for sure. So I would say part of the idea too is that you're going to have multiple components on a page. And so embedding on where this guy is, it's easier to sort of have your canvas and then place the pieces where you want versus this being injected. And then like we just saw, let's say I didn't realize that. And I put it, I put it here as well. And I'm like, why is this showing up twice? And then now I've got to go through my code and be like, where is this other display showing up? And then all of a sudden I'm like, it's in my form. I would have never guessed that. So that's something that could happen as well. Somebody said, is it bad practice to call all states in app.js? I would say if you don't need to pass it down, then yes, right? Because state will be like you would want to call state for what we're trying to do here. Like app.js doesn't need to have access to this. And it's just for our form and what we're modeling our form after. So yeah, it doesn't need to have access. I would try to consolidate as much as I can and keep it within each component, which will help you with your reusability. Because right now it might be easy to look at and say like, oh yeah, I could just throw everything that makes sense. And maybe even for your exam, that might be okay. But when you have multiple components and it's spread out everywhere, you want to make sure that you have access to everything you need versus just one app.js having everything and trying to deal with props and inheritance from, one prop to, or one component to a child component to another child component. You'd have access to everything you need there. Cool. Anybody have, so is it better to keep app.js as the parent? Yes. Yeah, absolutely. App.js will be your parent in almost all circumstances. Like your parent, like the founder parent. For sure. Any other questions? Great questions, guys. Godparent, the Godfather. Imagine. That's what I should have made as a movie. I messed up. All right, friends. Well, that's all I have for tonight. Don't forget your discussion questions. We will be back tomorrow. Again, you only have one core assignment, so please catch up this week if you are falling behind. And other than that, I hope you guys have a wonderful night.